talking. Well, you're listening to the Stranded Baptist, episode number 3. My name is Gunnar Gigunason. I am the pastor of Awesomeness Baptist currently the only Icelandic-speaking Baptist church in the country of Iceland, and only Reformed church in the country. So we're here in Reykjavik, Iceland, stranded on this island. Won't be that for long because I am flying over to the U.S. here on Sunday to meet with some of our supporting churches and meet with some church leaders and other churches to see if they would join us in the gospel work here in Iceland. Anyways, in today's episode, we're going to be covering some different topics. We're going to be going to talk about Jordan Peterson phenomena that's been going on. This guy has been surrounded by controversy for quite some time and has gained a lot of supporters. So we're going to be diving into that. We're going to be talking about that. What it teaches the church, what we celebrate, and what we should be on guard against. And then we're going to go into updates on ministry in Iceland, going through December and January, since this is sort of the first of the beginning of the month of February. I decided we should dive a little into what's been going over here the last couple of months. Then we're going to go talk about Elon Musk adventures. This guy is amazing and did something amazing this week. And then we're going to be going into February trip details. And lastly, we will get to the testimony this time around. So I'm excited about this. So let's, before we jump into it, let's do that. Before we jump into this, I want to say if you want to be in on the loop as to what's going on here in Iceland, then you can sign up for our monthly-ish email at our website. You can go to theicelandproject.org, theicelandproject.org, not icelandproject.org. And there on the right side of the menu, you will see sign up for our email updates. And you can sign up there. We send them out kind of monthly-ish just to update you as to what's been going on the ground. More of the out of the ordinary stuff. Of course, I know it would be really repetitive if I was always just going into, I preached and we had small groups and that type of stuff. But it's mostly what stuff happened this past month that was out of the ordinary. So if you want to be in on the loop on that, then feel free to sign up for that at our website, www.theicelandproject.org. And then we have a pastor's tour coming up in April. You can find info on that as well on our website. We had so many different pastors who wanted to come on the ground and see what's going on with the churches here. And so we decided to make it simpler on our side of things, because when a pastor comes, him and his wife or maybe another elder from their church may come, and they may stay here for 5 days or so, and they may want to meet up for coffee, sit down, and it takes a big chunk of the day, especially when you think about 10 to 20 different pastors coming over to Iceland wanting to do that. I mean, it's quite a lot of, it's at least a month that goes into just meeting with different pastors. So we decided to combine these trips and say, hey, we're going to do this 4 times a year. Actually, this year we're going to be doing it 3 times. But our plan is to do this once a quarter, to have pastors who want to know more about Iceland, want to be informed about the Iceland Project, what we're all about, then they can come over here. So if you want to sign up for that, if you want information on that, then it's in April. Just know it's not like a hectic schedule. We want to have opportunity for the pastors to talk to me and some other people on the ground. We go around looking at some stuff. We go talk with other pastors in the area. We talk about the need in Iceland and such. So just know that there's info on our website there if you want to check that out. And if you want to support the Iceland Project, if you're maybe just a family out there, I think our biggest sort of chunk of giving right now, I mean, our biggest, if we would take all the churches out, then all the individuals that support us every month financially would be bigger than our biggest supporting church. So there are lots of families out there and individuals. If you're a pastor, then of course you can sign up for the pastor's tour over here, and we can talk about that when you get over here. But if you want to support, if you want to give once towards the Iceland Project or something like that, then you can go on over to the Iceland Project on Facebook. I think it's facebook.com/Iceland Project, maybe the Iceland Project. But you can go there. You can find the latest update email that we shared, and then you can hop on over there. And at the bottom of that email, you'll see information on how to give. So if you're interested in that. Now, let's just jump into this. I want to talk about Jordan Peterson. He is coming here in June. I'll actually miss him because I'll be in the U.S. when he's here. But this guy, if we go a little bit into what's been going on surrounding this guy, he had sort of a college conflict. He's from Canada. He was working at a school there, and there was a new law requiring him to use the pronouns that other people wanted him to use. And actually, I think a part of this law is that it's punishable. It's a punishable crime if you don't use the proper pronouns that other people want you to use about them. And this professor, by no means, I'm not sure if he would identify as a right-leaning politically or what, but he is, I think, by no means conservative in that regard. He said, no, I'm not going to do that. That's totalitarianism. And you can't decide which words I use. And he has since then been very popular. He's posted videos on YouTube, lectures, and that type of stuff. He talks, in an age where Nazism is thrown around a lot. Like if you're a Trump supporter, you're a Nazi and that type of stuff. He's really the one who's kind of thinking about the Marxist side of things, saying, hey, totalitarianism is really bad too. Actually, they killed more people than the Nazis did in the Second World War and so on. So he's getting a rather large following lately. And it's a very strange phenomenon because he's definitely not... he just talks, and he's just the way he is. He doesn't have a whole lot of production about him. There's not a lot of show around him. He's not really flashy as a character. He just talks, and he's obviously very intelligent and very educated. And he's been going into these different podcasts and the infamous TV interview. I forgot the lady's name, but it's been a meme on Facebook lately where, he would say something and he would say, oh, so you mean to say that you hate women, or that type of stuff. So it's been very interesting to watch all the stuff surrounding him lately. He's at a place right now. He's on Patreon, which is a platform where people can support artists in doing their work. And so I think before he took his numbers down, he was up to $60,000 a month people were giving to him for doing the videos that he's doing. So he's at a place right now that if he gets fired from his university or whatever, then he's good to go. I mean, he's well off financially right now. He's blown up in popularity. And I think the Church of Christ can learn from this. I think 80% of his audience is men. I think I heard him in an interview say that 80% of his audience is men. And he is sort of saying that, it's okay to recognize that they have different tendencies, that they have different characteristics. Not every man is the same way, but at the same time, like overall, it's okay to value masculine tendencies and then feminine tendencies. And it's okay for you as a man to have masculine tendencies. It's okay for you as a woman to have feminine tendencies. And so I think he's spoken a lot, especially as a college professor. And I don't know about you guys, but I've been, even here in Iceland, just fascinated with what's going on in the colleges of the United States of America. I mean, it has been quite fascinating just to watch from afar the madness that's happening. There's this one guy called Ben Shapiro. He goes around to colleges and he's a speaker, a conservative speaker. He's a Jewish guy who has his hat on Hanukkah. Yeah, I think so. So he's Jewish, he's conservative. He goes on to college campuses to speak. And over the past 2 years, there's been this thing riling up where now everywhere he goes, there are protests, there are things set on fire, there are storefronts that are broken and bashed. And the funny thing is, like, when he goes into these college campuses, Nazism is thrown at him. He's a neo-Nazi, which is really ironic since he's a pretty takes his Jewish faith pretty seriously. And you've just been watching that, and I think from afar, sort of the Jordan Peterson phenomena that's been going on, I think it's a backlash against this type of stuff where, toxic masculinity has been thrown around a lot, and some of it has just been applied to masculinity at all. That any masculine traits is toxicity to the society. And then you see men are wanting to have someone tell them to take responsibility. He's not sort of itching their ears. He's not really telling them sort of soothing stories and trying to make reality different than what it is. He's really telling men to step up and be a man and take responsibility and take the suffering. He just released a new book called 12 Rules to Live By or something like that, where he's dealing with these things. And then there are men wanting to hear that aspirations are okay, and that appeals not to the masses. And I think we can learn from that. Like I'm thinking about myself over here. Like one of the guys, I know he didn't end well in ministry, and I think technically he is still in ministry. I think since this whole thing with Mark Driscoll happened, he sort of stepped out of the spotlight for a few months, and then he came back. But Mark Driscoll was one of the guys who I was listening to as a new convert while I was working, just saying, sort of step up and be who God has created you to be. And that's a message that I really needed to hear at that time. And I think that's sort of the phenomena that was happening in sort of the Christian community back in the day. But here we're seeing this in a sort of secular setting where you got this guy coming by and saying, hey, step up and play the role that you're supposed to be playing. Don't be afraid, speak your mind. Don't be afraid to fight for what you stand for, and so on and so forth. And so I think it may teach the church that actually appealing to what we were created for is not a negative message. Maybe there's something in us that longs to hear this. And in a society that says that it's bad and that type of stuff, well, maybe, just maybe, if we preach the truth of how God created us to be, to take responsibility, to live, and beyond just live to find your own purpose, but to live for the purpose of glorifying God, then maybe this is something that the church should aspire to do. But there is something like we should celebrate that's definitely there. I mean, men are inspired to take action and to lead well. There's dialogue happening. Of course, this guy has not opened the door. He's just blown it off its hinges. And then there are lots of unexpected people shifting views. I mean, one woman I talked to here in Iceland just messaged me the other day and told me she had been listening a lot to Jordan Peterson. She was studying to become a nurse, and they were talking about the ethics of abortion and that type of stuff. And someone brought up Jordan Peterson, who is pro-life, if I understood her correctly. And she said through watching him, she's been fascinated by this guy, and she kept on watching him. And actually her views on abortion have shifted, that type of stuff. And so, I mean, you see a lot of stuff happening with this guy. And one thing I've seen a lot within the Christian community, I mean, I read an article a couple of weeks back. I was trying to find it before doing this, but it was titled something like, "Is Jordan Peterson bringing in the next great revival?" And it was talking about YouTube comments from former atheists who now say that they believe in the existence of God because of Jordan Peterson. He says I think he identifies as a Christian in the historical Orthodox view by any means. I don't think he would he would be classified as a Christian, but I think what he means, and it seems to me, I've been trying to understand his faith. I've not watched all of his lectures. It seems to me he is, when he talks about the Bible, he really butchers the text, and sort of there's a great deal of eisegesis going on where you walk into the text with your own assumptions, and you try to get the text to say what your assumptions were to begin with. And it doesn't seem like he's very concerned about being faithful to what the author of the text intended it to say, but rather to sort of see if the text can somehow fit his own worldview and that type of stuff. I've never heard him talk about the gospel. I've never heard him talk about our need for a savior. Mainly in the interviews that I've seen, it seems that his belief in God is very pragmatic, sort of like, well, if we don't have a higher authority to appeal to, it becomes a problem, that type of stuff. Like spiritual but not religious, like many people say. So it's very interesting to watch. And so this article that I read a few weeks back, they were saying basically that he is the next one to bring a great revival to America. God is using this guy to bring people to faith. And well, I was thinking the whole time reading this article, I don't remember where this article was from. I don't know the view of the individual that wrote it. But at the same time, it's like, believe in what? Because I'm pretty sure Satan believes in the existence of God. I'm pretty sure Satan even believes that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. Belief in what? Just belief that these things happened, or the Orthodox view of what faith in Christ means, that he is now your Savior, that is your only hope when you stand before the judgment seat of God, and he is your Lord, that is your life is his, purchased by his blood. And so I think we have to hammer on this, and we have to be careful because, like in Iceland, this is a very popular idea. What would you say you are? Christian. 2014, 2015, the Humanist Association conducted a survey asking how many of the surveyors would consider themselves Christian. I think 60-something% said that they were Christian. Now, this just came to me when I'm here, so I don't have the numbers in front of me. I think it was like 64% of the people said that they were Christian. And then they were asked, do you believe in the virgin birth? Do you believe, and a big percentage of them, those 64%, I forgot how many. I think it was like similar. 60-something% of the 64% did not believe in the sort of typical Christian beliefs. And then when asked, like, wait, why would you consider yourself a Christian? They were telling that they believe in the morality of the Christian faith, which of course is a totally different thing, especially since the morality is the fruit of our faith and not the foundation of our faith, like a lot of people think. And so we have to be careful when, for instance, when people, you may be excited that someone you don't or have known for a long time is now telling you, hey, I've been listening to this Jordan Peterson guy and I'm thinking about God and faith for the first time. Okay, that's great. But at the same time, it's like, what do you mean by that? Is that what do you mean by faith in God? What do you mean in God? Do you believe that he exists, or are you thinking along gospel lines that you need a savior and that type of stuff? And we really need to hammer on the fact that, man, we need theology in the church. It is the study of God, and we need a right view of God. And in viewing the holiness and magnificence of our God, we need to see our own depravity and our own state and our own need for a Savior. We need to be in awe and wonder of the grace that he has given us. And we have to go out and share the message that God wants us to share. And like people have told me again and again, careful to not get into theology because it will kill your faith. But theology, by definition, is the study of God. And what is my faith built on? It is built on the nature and character of God. So that should mean that when I grow in theology and understanding of God, of course, I don't want just to have head knowledge, but my faith should grow because it's based on this God that I worship. It's not, my faith isn't just in me. And a lot of people have this kind of idea of faith, that I believe that I am right. instead of I believe in God who is sovereign, holy, magnificent, omniscient, all-powerful, all-knowing, and the more I get to know him, the more my faith grows because it's built from him and my faith springs out from him and all things are made for him. And so, so we have to really dig in and know what we're talking about because we want to share the good news of the gospel and not just get people to believe that there's some kind of God out there. When a lot of times that God is sort of a Frankenstein, what I call it, of a God where they take what they like from Buddhism and Hinduism and Christianity and Islam or whatever, and they sew this God up that kind of looks like them. They like the karma over there. They like the morality of the Christian faith or whatever, but they don't understand the gospel. And they don't understand what the point of the morality is, what the point of the law of God is, to point us to our need for a Savior, like Galatians 3 is talking about in other passages. So, we have to be careful. We have to, we can celebrate that for the first time for a lot of people, they're really thinking about God, but at the same time, we have to be wise in our engagement and not just settle for people who believe that God exists. Satan believed that God exists. That doesn't help you. And a living faith, like James talks about, is a faith that not only knows who God is and what he has done, but a faith that causes you to live in light of it. And so we have to be keeping our eyes open. This is a great opportunity for the church. I really hope when he gets here, the conversation will be blown open like it has elsewhere. But at the same time, that the church is faithful to stand on theology. And theology matters. I'm tired of people saying, well, he loves Jesus, therefore that's enough for me. And you're like, well, which Jesus is it? Is it Jesus of Islam, the prophet, who is not God, who is just here to testify on Allah's behalf? Is it Jehovah's Witnesses Jesus? Is the first created being? Is it the Mormon Jesus who used to be just a man and lived a good life and had a bunch of wives and now he is graduated to the status of God? It really should matter to us what we mean by these terms. And actually, I was thinking about this the other day. It's like we really need to, when talking about the faith, like I believe in God, we really need to define our terms when we're talking with people. Because actually, I was trying to fly a drone. It's been really windy over here in Iceland lately. I was trying to fly a drone downtown, which was kind of scary because the airport is pretty close by. And I'm pretty sure the drone has like a setting that keeps it away from getting too close to the airport. But then I was wondering if it worked or not because there were airplanes flying pretty low overhead. So it was freaking me out a bit, and I didn't want to go too high. So it's just kind of hovering over the rooftops and trying to get some shots of that beautiful church downtown where almost no one meets. And while I was flying my drone and the wind was like blowing it away, I got approached by two Mormons, and I was thinking about this, like we really need to define our terms, trying to get a gospel conversation going, but at the same time, flying my drone, looking into the sky while I was trying to talk to them. It was a bit interesting, but we really need to define our terms. We really need to, and I was reminded again, I've talked with Mormons before pretty extensively, but at the same time, it's kind of interesting how they use all of the same terminology, but they mean completely different things about them. So in the end, I gave him my phone number, and I was hoping that he would call and we could talk more. He didn't seem too interested and hasn't called, and it's been like 2 weeks. So we'll see how that goes. We'll see how that goes. But we should celebrate this, that there are, views on abortions are changing for some people. There are some people out there that may be thinking about God for the first time. And as always, we should be ready to give a defense for the hope that is within us. And we should be using the opportunities that are provided for us to do so. And this may be a great opportunity for our churches to learn that maybe in a world that seems to have one message to play, like a broken record, maybe people are starting to find sort of disgruntlement. Is that even a word? Disgruntlement over, like, there seems to be something more I'm supposed to do. And instead of sacrificing the message that is unique to the church, we should probably stand on it right now. Because I think this Jordan Peterson thing shows us that people are looking for something different. Is there someone out there that will tell me to take responsibility? Like someone says, there's a world full of men out there, or a world full of boys out there that can shave. And a call for being a man and stepping up, laying your life down, that type of stuff. I think it resonates with us because we're created in the image of our God. And I think we should, as a church, maybe realize that reaching the people around us may not require us to sacrifice our message for that. It may actually require us to stand firm on the truth, and to a world full of people that is looking for something else because what they have right now is not working. Maybe God will use that to open their eyes to the beauty of the gospel, and we should not be afraid to speak it and stand on truth. Anyways, some January and December updates. It's been really bad weather lately, and it's kind of sad how it always hits on a Sunday. I feel like all Sundays except one this year has had bad weather. And I think this upcoming Sunday is going to have bad weather, wind and hail. And I think I'm flying out that Sunday morning, so that would be interesting. I know I'll be flying out that Sunday morning. So that's going to be very interesting. But it's been really bad weather. But the days are getting longer. I'm excited about that. I definitely feel it, that vitamin D is returning to my body. There's more than 4 or 5 hours of sunlight now. You kind of get sunlight from, well, I should probably guess between 9 and 5. Yeah, something like that. So it's the sun is returning. It is snowing outside right now. It's snowing and hailing and lots of different stuff. There's been lots of sickness going on. I don't know how many of you are familiar with belonging to a smaller church, but it's very funny that someone walks in and is sick one week, kind of like battling something, and the next week half the congregation is sick, staying at home, that types of stuff. So there's lots of sickness. The flu has been going on. We spent all of last week at the hospital with Solomon. If you don't know, Solomon was born with a genetic mutation and underdeveloped brain on 5 different parts. And because of this genetic mutation, he's got a thing called hypotamia, which is weak muscles and weak organs, among other things. You know, there are lots of symptoms from that, including he doesn't know how to swallow. He doesn't. I don't think he'll. Unless a God does a miracle, I don't think he'll talk or walk, that type of stuff. But he got 2 viruses last week, which was a bit scary for us because we had been told that people with hypotamia are not expected to live long. And the reason why is that it's not a degenerative disease, but rather the danger is because of the weak organs to catch something that is normal for our bodies to get rid of. It can be much, much different for those who have weak organs. And a lot of these people with hypotamia, they end up dying because of their lungs not functioning well, not getting rid of infection and that type of stuff, and it just settles, and then they die out that way. And he got 2 viruses that were dealing with this lungs, and he was dropping in oxygen levels and that type of stuff. But he's home now, so that's been awesome. But here in December, here in January, I realized I was burnt out. And I always thought of burnout as this very subjective thing. Like, I always thought of it as sort of like when people say, I'm tired, and then I'm really tired. And then when you're beyond really tired, you graduate to burnout. And that's just sort of like whatever you feel like. But I had been battling with bad mood swings, wow, I don't even know how to say this word. Palpitations, heart palpitations, I think. I had been dealing with shortness of breath. I was sleeping 3-4 hours a night. I was dealing with that, which apparently is insomnia. I didn't know that. I always thought of insomnia. I just always thought of it like the Fight Club guy. Like this guy doesn't sleep at all for like 4 weeks and is just going insane. And but apparently insomnia is just not being able to sleep, which is definitely not as exciting. So I had that. I was just had bad mood swings. Felt bad about my job performance, like I wasn't doing enough, like I couldn't work enough hours. And then I realized that burnout is actually a medical term. So it has symptoms and all this. And my wife kind of sent me this link and said, hey, honey, I think you're burned out. Like I think you have burnout, and it's an actual medical thing. And people actually go to rehab for burnout, like CEOs and stuff. And she sent me the link, and I read over the symptoms of severe burnout, and I had every one of them except fainting. And I realized that, man, I need to cut back. And so I realized that. I just got this watch for Christmas. So this was around Christmas that I was finding this out. And it's been very interesting because I decided to tackle this right away, slow down a little bit of work, focus on less things, just do preachings and sort of work my way up to meeting with people and that type of stuff. But it turned out that, and I got rid of my iPhone until I realized that, dang, it's difficult to live without an iPhone. So you don't realize this, but like when I didn't have a phone number, I did not know what to do. I had like 5 different phone numbers on my phone, and even the line where you could call and ask for a person's phone number, we have this line that you can call, which is kind of like the Icelandic Yellow Book. It's down. It's no longer operating. So like you have to go into a cafe, ask to use someone's computer. When you don't know where an address is, you have nothing. You just kind of like, okay, I guess I'll just drive around until I find the street. And I just didn't realize how difficult this would be. I actually bought like an analog, like a book calendar that I had to fill in. And I didn't know, I couldn't, see my appointments on the Google calendars. But it was amazing not getting any emails, notifications, not getting any Facebook notifications or Twitter or Instagram or Messenger. And I told people to stop texting me because I had a Nokia 3310. If you remember that, that's like a phone I had literally when I was like 16. And I didn't want to like tap the different numbers all the time to text people. So I just said, call me. And it was great. And so I did that for a week, and it really helped just sort of get the mind focused on different things, off these things, so your mind is not constantly doing something. And that's maybe something I learned from that experience, is that I may be too much, like every time I drive, I'm listening to an audiobook, I'm listening to a podcast. There's never really a silent moment of my life, except for maybe when I'm working on a preaching. And just appreciating boredom. When you sit at your doctor's office and you don't have Facebook to scroll through, and your mind just wanders and you're thinking about God and you may pray and that type of stuff. It's just great. And so, but I realized that I have a lot of American supporters who are trying to, FaceTime me and Skype me and trying to get in touch and trying to send me an iMessage and, that type of stuff. And I realized that this probably couldn't last for long. So I took my iPhone back, deleted a bunch of apps. And if you're trying to send me Facebook messages and I don't reply, that's because I don't see any notifications nowadays on my phone or at all. So, it was a great time. And then that's why I mentioned my watch. I got this watch, Fitbit, for Christmas, and it measures your heart rate. And it actually dropped when I just took the phone out. I decided to just focus on praying, getting myself to a good spiritual state, and focusing on, praying and preaching the word. And my heart rate dropped significantly. Like it was, I think, at 78 beats per minute, and it dropped to 62 over a period of like a week, and it kind of stayed around there. So I'm really excited about where I am right now. I'm not there yet, but it's been amazing to see just the restoration of hope and joy. Like I was really starting to lack joy there for a little bit, and I would encourage you to check on this. Like this is an actual medical condition that people get, and so if you're there, just make sure that you prioritize. And I realize that running on all cylinders for 2 years since Mikhail got diagnosed with cancer. So, I mean, 2016, 2017, we've spent probably around half of 2016 at the hospital doing chemo with Mikhail, probably around a third of 2017 at the hospital with chemo and with the birth of Solomon. It just really does something to you just to be constantly working. What I was realizing I was doing too is whenever I'd get a free night, I would just work during the night, try to answer emails, that type of stuff. Wasn't really doing anything that was fun, going out with friends or just hanging out. So I'm trying to tackle this, and I'd be thankful for your prayers. Now, talking about burnout, I'm moving on over here. So really, there isn't much to say from January and December because I've been gearing down quite a lot and just doing the regular ministry of preaching, meeting with our people, praying, and just the different tasks that need to be done, sort of that has to be done, paying the bills for the church, that type of stuff. So I'm going to keep on doing that a little longer this year, especially when we're in this period of life where we have hospital visits still and that kind of stuff. So, but talking about burnout, there's this guy out there that's been in the news this week, Elon Musk. And he is like the real life Tony Stark. If you don't know who Tony Stark is, that's the character that plays Iron Man. Not the character that plays Iron Man, the character that is Iron Man. So he's the owner of Tesla, the Boring Company, which I thought actually meant, he was playing a joke that this was a boring company, but actually it's a tunnel making company basically, and SpaceX. And he's in the news this week because of this thing that he's doing with SpaceX. He flew a car to space, and there was a successful launch, and actually the things launching the spacecraft up, usually they die off and they explode and they're ruined and you can't use them again. But he managed to get them back to Earth safely so they can be reused for the next space launch, which is an incredible thing that he achieved there. But he decided to send his own car to space with a mannequin in a spacesuit in it, sitting like this, like it was driving the car, and he wanted to sling it to Mars to be there. So he missed Mars, and the car is now just floating through space with this mannequin in it in a spacesuit. I love this guy. I absolutely love this guy. But I was listening to these comedians talk about it, and they were talking about this theory that maybe this was like, what if that was a mannequin? What if that's like an actual person that he like murdered or something, and this is like the perfect crime? And I started thinking about one of my all-time favorite movies, Rope, if you know that, by Alfred Hitchcock, when they're trying to do the perfect crime. And it's actually quite an incredible movie, not just because of the acting and the directing and the storyline, but it's also all filmed in one go. So you couldn't keep it going for the whole movie length, but every time they switched film in the camera, they would go into a black spot. put the new film in, go back up, and it was filmed all in one go, and they would just move walls around the house and that type of stuff. You should watch that movie. But this would be the perfect crime, wasn't it? If he would just sling someone to space, the whole world watching. But there's nothing theological about this story. I just thought this was an incredible thing that he did. This is the real life Tony Stark. I'm telling you, he's going to be flying around in an iron suit here in a little bit. He's a crazy guy, Elon Musk. So you should follow what he's doing. He's of course done pretty incredible things with the Tesla company and with a boring company. I think he's trying to do like a tunnel underground that will basically be the future roadway system where people go hundreds of miles per hour, and it would be very efficient. Now, I may be mistaken about this, but I think his dream is to get to a point where you can be anywhere in the world within 2 hours, something like that. It was like a very short time frame. That was his ultimate goal with the Boring Company. And then this is the SpaceX company, a company that is, I think, trying to get to a point where they can offer space trips for people. And so it's a quite incredible thing that's been going on there this week. But lastly, I want to go into our testimony as to why I'm here. So a lot of people ask me about this. How did it get to where I started a church? And I figured if I could just tell my story here, then I could link people to this to give them an idea of why we're here. And I don't need a script for this. I'm just gonna, kind of play it by ear on this one. But I was born here in Reykjavik, Iceland. A lot of people ask me about that because of my accent, and I can fake an Icelandic accent, but I decide to talk more like an American. I don't know why. I watched a lot of movies when I was a kid, so maybe that kind of ruined my English and made me speak like an American. I played a lot of video games, and so I lived in the U.S. for 3 years between the ages of 16 and 19. So that may have something to do with it. I don't know why I speak like this, but I feel like a lot of Icelanders speak with an American accent over here. Every once in a while, you hear someone who speaks like with an Irish, no, not an Irish accent, but like an English accent, and he or she is actually Icelandic, and it's kind of weird. There's actually one in our documentary, Christian by Default, where you'll see that this lady kind of speaks with a British accent, but she was Icelandic. But anyways, I was born here in 1989, 23rd of January. It was a cold, misty Wednesday night. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to start there. But I grew up in a church where that my dad planted. He planted it before I was born. I think it is about 10 years older than me, something like that. And it was called Crossin. And he was one of the most controversial figures here in Iceland for a while. He was very often in newspapers, very often in radio and TV interviews and that type of stuff. Often very controversial because of his views on homosexuality and abortion. He was vocal against abortion and that type of stuff. I remember growing up, and there would be mentally ill people outside of our apartment as I was going to school with binoculars and cameras and just kind of making me scared. And actually one time this lady was stalking our family, and when my dad went out, she tried to hit him with a car. He had to run from her in his car, had to call the police while she was chasing him, trying to run him off the road. So it was a very interesting childhood. You would get your friends coming up to you that would say, hey, my dad told me your dad is weird. He's strange and you should not like him, and that type of stuff. But it wasn't too bad. Like I always had friends as a kid. But then, and this church was kind of the way I describe it, it was definitely a Pentecostal church. They would describe themselves as a Pentecostal church, I think. I'm not too sure about today. But the way I describe it to outsiders is that this church was kind of like Benny Hinn and Joel Osteen had a baby, or at least a period that I was in the church, and I remember being there. I was in the period where it was kind of transitioning from Benny Hinn-esque stuff to Joel Osteen-y, more Joel Osteen-y kind of leanings. And now I feel like it's way more on the Joel Osteen side. Not, I don't know if there's. It's been a while since I've been to service there, but I don't think, I have a feeling it's not very sort of charismatic the way we used to be. There's a holiness church. I grew up thinking that, or people telling me that Baptists didn't believe in the Holy Spirit. And then, there were interesting ideas that floated around, which was, there was just, I was really scared as a kid. I was always thinking there was demons behind everything, and not really secure in my walk with God. And actually, probably I shouldn't have, because I wasn't a Christian at that point. But then, it's just very, and I don't know where these ideas came from, but and I would have people tell me that I couldn't get pets as a kid because witches would use them to spy on Christian families and stuff. I couldn't, I would hear someone tell me I couldn't go to the movies because if the rapture would happen, there's so many demons in those movies that they wouldn't allow me to be raptured, and I'd get stuck in the ceiling wearing no clothes and that type of stuff. And at least the way I remember is people were really serious about it, some of the people in the church. And so I kind of grew up with this idea, and by the time I was 14, I was going through some personal issues, and the family was going through some issues. And I remember kind of wondering, okay, these are messed up circumstances that I'm going through. Why doesn't God do anything? If he can make people fall down on Sundays and make them cry out and make them shake and make them run around, if he can literally what seems like control their bodies, why can't he fix this current circumstance that I'm in, or at least give me joy in them? And so I decided to try a different route, and I decided to try out alcohol. And I didn't know how much alcohol I needed to get drunk. So I asked a friend of mine who was going to go to buy alcohol for me to buy me 4 cases of alcohol. 4 cases of alcohol. One case had 4 6-packs in it. So I ended up with around 100 large beers, and I just started to drink a lot. And I realized that at that age, with that small body of mine, I needed about 2 beers to get drunk. And I would, unscrew the window, go out, just lay out in the field and get drunk in the middle of the night and go to school in the next morning. And I started drinking not only in weekends, but, during as many days as I could. I would just go out and be alone. I would literally put a bunch of beer in a suitcase, walk around the neighborhood to see if any of my friends would join me just out in the fields drinking beer. But it didn't take long till I started kind of going into cannabis, going into other drugs after that. And by 16, I was pretty depressed. And what I really hated about this, I was really partying hard at that point. But what I really hated about this is like I look a lot like my dad. So I'd go to parties and people would say, that's the son of Gunnar, Gunnar i Krossen. And people would wanna, when I was there doing drugs and drinking, people would want to talk about my view on homosexual marriage and abortion and what I thought about God and that type of stuff. And I thought it was pretty obvious that I was not really concerned about that at that moment. And so I hated that fact. Absolutely hated it. But then I a friend of mine came back home from America, and he said he had been to a Bible school for a year, and he was planning on being there for 3 years. And I said to myself, I know my dad would probably pay for it if I say I want to go to Bible school. And so I wanted to go somewhere else where no one knew me, no one knew my family, and I could just be there, I could do some classes, and then I could go and party. And so I moved to Huntsville, Alabama when I was 16. My dad helped me pay for it. It was much cheaper then because the kroner was at such a strong place. Like if you would come here at that point, a pair of jeans in Iceland would cost you $300. So that's how the currency rate was back then. So I got to go to the U.S., and I realized quickly after I got there, Katrina had just struck New Orleans and that part of the States when I got there. And we were basically went all the way down to Baton Rouge in that area to help with handing out food and that type of stuff. And that's when I realized this is not a normal school. This is not like a class from 9 to 5 and then you can do whatever you want. You had one off day in the week. If you didn't keep your apartment clean, you would lose that off day and go to the church and clean. This was not a 9 to 5 thing. This was like a 9 to 9 thing. It would take over your whole day. And I hated it. I absolutely hated it the first months I was there. And so I was calling my dad constantly, please take me back home. I promise I'll pay you back. I'll start working. I'll give the money back to you. But you just please get me a plane ticket and get me back home because I do not like this place. And my dad ultimately said no. And so I stayed there for the first year. But then realizing that that's when I started to read a lot of books. I liked reading and understanding. And that's when I came back to sort of the belief in God, like we were talking about earlier. But I didn't define it too well. It was just a belief that there was a God out there. And he probably, the Bible was probably his word, and I should read that. But not understanding the gospel at that point. And I realized that I was supposed to be a nice person. And that was sort of what Christianity became to me at that point. And then I would come here during the summer to work to pay for my next year out there. So I decided to do all 3 years out there. So I'd come here and work to prepare for the next 9 months in the States. And I would faceplant. Like I would go to do drugs again. I would go drinking again. I would go partying again. And then I would go back to the States and I would do great until Christmas break came. And then I'd go back home for a couple of weeks and then I'd faceplant again. I would drink again. I would do drugs again and that type of stuff. And then I would go there for a few months and I would be fine. It was a Christian bubble. It was a church. It was a church that I was a part of out there that was like, I think it's 6,000 people now. It was like 4,000 back in the day. But it was literally bigger than a lot of towns in Iceland. So you could live and in that bubble and not have any contact with the outside world. You had a bunch of people supporting you and sort of living a good life. And so I would do well when I was there, and then I would go back home and I'd faceplant. And then when I was 17, so this would be my second year, I came back home during the Christmas break and the New Year's, and I started partying again, and I felt so bad. And I was still in this situation that I was fleeing from when I was 14, and I just decided, like, God, why can't you fix this thing for me? And I decided to, I don't know what was going on. I was really drugged up. I was really drunk as well. And I don't know, I don't actually think I was drugged up at that point, but I was really drunk. And I decided I just wanted to kill myself. So I was at this party by a harbor, and I jumped into the sea, and I was just going to take one good breath of seawater and die off. And I don't know if it was a call for help or what, but I really felt miserable at that point. And I had a lot of questions in my mind about, why God would allow certain things And when I was 10 years old, so going back a few years, this was 7 years later, but when I was 10 years old, my grandmother, who I spent nights with sometimes and that type of stuff, she got murdered in her apartment. And I didn't realize up until recently what a big moment that was for me in my faith and in my life. What a defining moment it was, because it started a bunch of questions for me. Why would a good God and an all-powerful God allow such a thing to happen? You know, it's the problem of pain, problem of evil that so many of us deal with. And it was just gnawing at me. Like I didn't start to think about it at 10. But, the following years and that's probably partly what drove me to seek shelter in something other than God, was that I decided to, okay, God, it doesn't really seem like you're doing much good for me, so I'm going to try these substances. And so at 17, I tried to commit suicide or whatever that was. But I felt miserable, absolutely miserable. And then I would go back to the US and I'd do fine. Like, I wouldn't drink, I'd stop cussing, I want to do drugs, that type of stuff. And then I came back during the summer, face plant again. The only time it lasted for a little bit after I came back home was after my 3rd year there. I think I lasted for about 3 months. Then I decided to go to film school, which was overflowing with drugs. There are a lot of people there who get inspired from things like that, and it was very secular in its thought, and the depression just kind of got a hold of me again. Like I was watching some of my assignments there, and it was just all filled with like hopelessness and darkness. Like literally my graduating assignment was called Kameldir och flera, camels and more. But it was just about the pointlessness of life. And the last sentence was something like my dad always told me, the only thing guaranteed is life is taxes and death. That's literally the last sentence. Yeah, I was a sad individual. Yeah, and he got hit by a car and just died a pointless death while running to the bus stop. And I was just hopeless, I was thinking about, is there any point in this? Now, by that point, my mom and dad had gotten divorced. And that, of course, hit the newspapers. And it hit the newspapers because he was a controversial figure for his defense of marriage. And now all of a sudden people were like, talking about, isn't this hypocrisy? Like this guy who talks about the sanctity of marriage is now a divorced man. And so my mom goes to the US for a few months right after the divorce. My siblings all have their sort of wives or husbands, and my dad kind of disappears as well. And I'm left alone in this big house. And I'm just, I don't see anyone really. They're all kind of licking their wounds in their own corners. And I just started partying, So I would smoke a lot of cannabis, and smoke a lot of cigarettes as well. And just drink and do some other drugs and that type of stuff. And I'd invite my people over and we'd just party and try to drown out the hopelessness that I had. And that was a really tough moment in my life. But then it got kind of worse because women came forward. I think 7 of them came forward that accused my dad of sexual misconduct, I think you could call it. So the implications was that he was not faithful to my mom, that type of stuff. and I don't know what to make of that, because I mean there were 7 ladies that came forward, but then a couple of them had weird things to say. Like one, I think, said he touched my shoulder and I knew what he was thinking, that type of stuff, and so that was supposedly sexual harassment. Then there were others, and like a couple of them who had the most serious allegations, which was that I think he wanted to see them exposed. Was they were my mom's sisters, and I didn't know what to make of that, because I know this one who said that he had sort of attacked her in this way. I remember when I was young and she went out of the country for what felt like, for me when I was a kid, for a few months, and her daughter was staying with us, and I was thinking back, and I was like, is this something that a person would do with a guy that they said assaulted them this way? So it was all just very confusing to me. And to make matters worse, one of the guys in the film school, her mom was leading his mom was the spokesperson for these ladies, and so he was, apparently he got really mad at me, and it was just a very confusing time. And then my dad stepped down from ministry, and he was going to take a break. And then, what was it? It must have been a year and a half later, he got married. And my mom was spending a lot of time in the States, and they wanted to get back over. He wanted to get back into ministry after that, and my dad and my sister, they started fighting over who would control the church. So my sister took over as pastor when he stepped down. Obviously, we were not a complementarian church. I was probably the only member of my family that was complementarian, or that is complementarian right now. And so they started fighting over the church. Got to a point where they really actually had to call the church to police to a church meeting, because people were physically threatening each other and that type of stuff. And that was a shame. It was a complete shame in my mind. But at that point, I was the youth pastor at the church. So at the end of film school, when I was partying a lot, I meet this lady across the street that I had my eye on for a long time, but I knew she was engaged to someone else. Then I found out she wasn't engaged to him anymore, and I swoop in, and her name was Svava, and we started talking. And by the end of film school, we're dating. We had known each other for a couple of months, and then we started dating, and then we dated for about 3 months, and then we got married. And the last time I got over my drug habits was the day of my marriage. Never done drugs since. But at that point, I was still had a view that Christianity was sort of be a nice person. Just be moral, be nice, share your toys, and then hope God is in a good mood when you see him in heaven and he will let you in. Didn't really see my own sinfulness and the extent of it. I didn't really see the holiness of God and the extent of that. Just try to be nice. And so I decided I was going to be married now. And we were going to get married so that we could feel good, that we could do stuff together. And I was going to stop, drinking, and I was going to stop doing drugs. And then a few months into our marriage, I'd been a couple of weeks after I stopped drinking, I was asked to take over the youth ministry. And at that point, the youth had shrunk down from like 60 people down to about 1 person, which was my little niece, Inkalala. And I decided to, I'll take over the youth ministry. I'll invite my little niece over. But lo and behold, we started having services, and people started coming and started growing a little bit, to about 20 people. And I knew that I would have to be ready to answer questions about the faith. And I was preaching every Saturday at that point, where there were youth services. And then I was preaching maybe 1 or 2 Sundays per month. And so I knew I had to realize what I was talking about. And so after film school, I took the first available job. This was after the financial collapse, and it was a grocery store job, the most intensely boring job I've ever had, where I literally had to put ingredient labels on any product that came from the US. So think about 10,000 noodle packages, and you have to put ingredient labels on all of them in Icelandic. And so your job consisted of standing at a table doing this. And so I was encouraged to bring like an iPod or something, listen to music, try to make my job a little more bearable. So I brought my phone, and I started listening to preachings from pastors that were popular. And I ran into these guys that were preaching like I'd never heard of before. Like their whole sermons seemed to be saturated in this gospel that they mentioned again and again and again, and I had never heard someone hammer so hard on the gospel. And it was John Piper I started listening to, and then from that I started listening to Matt Chandler, Darren Patrick, Mark Driscoll at the time. I started listening to Tim Keller, and the guy in Birmingham, come on, the president of the IMB, David Platt, that's the name. So I started listening to all these guys, and I started hearing this very different kind of message. And I was totally convicted by it, and realized that my view of the Bible had been completely wrong, and my view of the faith had been completely wrong. Like up until that point, Christianity to me was just be a nice person. And now all of a sudden I'm seeing that actually that's the problem. I'm not. I can't be. I've failed. I've sinned against a holy God, and I need a Savior, because this holy God is also a righteous God. But now you hear the story but the story doesn't end there. He's also a gracious and loving and merciful God. And so to show mercy without betraying his righteousness, he sent his son to pay the debt that you could not, so that you could be imputed, you could have his righteousness, and he would take to the cross your sin. And so at the grocery store, I became a Christian for the first time. I realized that this is actually the centerpiece of the Christian faith. And my preaching completely changed. I remember going up on a Sunday morning, because I had been preaching on Sundays for a while there, at least once or twice a month. And I just asked the church to forgive me, because I had not been preaching right. And from there on, I changed the way I was preaching. The youth ministry kind of took over, and we started hammering on this. But then I started listening to other podcasts. I found an app from the Reformed Theological Seminary, and it seemed like they had most of their courses on there for free. And I started listening to them. And you start growing in your understanding, and you come into your own convictions, looking at the Word of God, and you'd realize, I started realizing more and more, I'm not really in agreement with the church I'm at right now. And I wonder if there's any kind of church like this here. Who are these people that I'm listening to? What kind of church is it? And lo and behold, they were Baptists, most of them, and Reformed people. And I always thought of Baptists like the ones who didn't have the Holy Spirit. So I was like, wait, these are Baptists, And so quickly after my conversions, a thought came up when I kind of looked around, and I realized there are no Baptist churches here. It's like this thought came, you should plant a church. And I thought, that's an incredibly stupid idea. I'm not going to plant a church. That's an insanely stupid idea. I had no romantic feelings about being a pastor. I had experienced my dad selling our house, and we lived in the church building for 3 years when I was a kid, because he was a pastor. I had experienced people trying to kill my dad because he was a pastor, trying to run him over. I had experienced going to church on Sundays and having ketchup all over the building because someone decided to vandalize the property. Like I had experienced my friends telling me that their parents are saying that my dad is insane. I had experienced the hatred that he got, and I had no romantic ideas about what it meant to be a pastor, and I thought this was an incredibly stupid idea. But for about 2 years, I would listen 9 hours a day. And I went from this is an incredibly stupid idea to all of a sudden being at a place where I couldn't imagine myself not doing this. And I found myself at this grocery store crying. Just like, God, why would you send Piper to America, you know? Can you send David Platt over to Iceland or, you know, any of these guys? And I would just cry over, like, I was listening to these gospel-saturated sermons, and I was thinking, why can't we hear anything like this over here? It was a really rough time. Like, I remember I was probably clinically depressed at that point. I would battle tears all day long during work. I would sometimes have to go to the bathroom and just cry. Sometimes I'd come home about an hour after work because I just had to sit in my car and cry. And I was trying to explain to my wife, I think we're going to have to go and start a church. And I can imagine what the people must have been thinking. This guy working at a grocery store, stocking shelves and crying. Someone must have walked by and been like, that guy really hates his job. But man, it was a rough time. It was a really rough time. And so we decided to let go. My wife didn't get it. She said yes, but she didn't have any idea what she was getting into. And I didn't have any idea what I was doing. Like, I literally Googled what to do when starting a church, and I found a checklist. I found a checklist of like things to do. Get a business card check. Like, that's the most important thing about starting a church. And we decided to leave the church and say, okay, let's do this. And I took a few months to pray and to put together a statement of faith and to think about what a church is supposed to be. And so I started questioning everything. Like I was thinking, if I had a Bible on an island and I read it for 2 years before someone found me and I became a Christian on that island, and then I got to this place where there was a church, what would I expect to see when I walked into it? And then I realized that probably is even a presupposition. Would I even expect to walk into a church? Or, you know, what is a church? And so I started thinking about, you know, ecclesia and what does this word mean? And just like, okay, what does the Bible say? And I started thinking about, okay, why do we run in circles in our Sunday gatherings? We'd run in circles, and it's like, there's nothing in the scriptures here to say that. And what is the point of the church? What's the ultimate goal of the church? You know, it's to glorify God. Ephesians 3:21, right? It's to give God the glory. And I started thinking, and I just literally had a blank sheet of paper, just writing down stuff that what a church should do. And you started checking out all the one another's, and you check out the Great Commission. And the natural response of the disciples was to go out and plant churches. So in their mind, it looked like that fulfilling this mission that they got was to go out and plant churches. And you were just thinking through all these different issues. And then I don't know how to start a church. So I just kind of said that, set a status on Facebook, said we're going to start a church on Wednesday. Whoever wants to come to the Bible study is welcome to join us. You know, like if you want to be a part of starting a church over here. And there was one other couple that came. And it was actually the couple that took over as youth ministers after us, after we left. It turns out they had been changing a lot over their last 2 years or so. And they were listening to some of the same guys that we were listening to. They were Reformed too. And so I started out with just me, Svava and I, and Mikael, our kid, and then Fredrik and Kristin. And she was pregnant at that point. No, she was not pregnant at that point. And so we just started from there, and we didn't know what we were doing. We baptized a few people in our bathtub. I think I didn't write a constitution until about 2 years into the church plant. Like, I had no idea. Like, I had no one to really talk to about this. Like, all the church planting taking place in Iceland has been because of fighting going on with churches over the color of the carpet, or usually, like, something stupid that divides churches. And so I didn't know what I was doing. I started listening to podcasts, trying to read some books. So I was listening to podcasts about church planting, and all of a sudden I hear this guy in one of this small venue places talking about church planting, and he was talking about this small church in Virginia that's looking for indigenous church planters in Iceland. And I was saying, this was about a year into it or something. I was like, wait, I'm Icelandic. I'm starting a church. I should talk to these guys. So I sent an email to the guy that did the lecture, and he got me in touch with Colby Garman, who had just moved from Iceland back to the States because of health issues with her daughter, and he had become a pastor in a church there. But I met these Baptist guys from Virginia who were not a big church, but they had been planting for a long time. And Clint Clifton, who's written a few books about church planting, he's got a podcast on church planting, and he's overseeing, I think, North American Mission Board church planting efforts in the DC area and surrounding areas. And I started to get to know him, and these Colby Garman and Clint Clifton have just been incredible friends. One of my best friends, I'd have to say, even though we're separated, and it's hard to not hang out and that type of stuff. Like, I love these guys, and I don't think I would be here without them. And then we keep on learning from our mistakes, and now we have this fountain of wisdom of this small church in Virginia that's keep starting churches, and they've learned a lot from their mistakes, and they can share some wisdom with us. But I remember it was tough because the first two and a half years, something like that, of our church, then I was doing this really with no pay. Like, I don't know if bivocationally is the right word if you're not getting paid from the other job, but I was giving a lot of money or putting a lot of money from us aside for the church so that we could do stuff as a church. And I wasn't getting paid a lot. Like, there was about a year and a half where we would run out of money about a week or two into the month. And then for the rest of the month, we'd go to a halfway house and eat dinner as a family because we couldn't afford to. I remember my car was breaking down, and I remember I was working so much, like I was working 9 hours a day in my regular job, and then maybe taking 3 to 5 hours doing church-related stuff, trying to meet with people to talk with them about the gospel, trying to meet with new converts, or thinking about the preaching, or preparing for a small group, or anything like that. And I was just tired, and my wife was tired, understandably. And we were thinking, okay, how is this sustainable? I don't think it is. And so I sent an email out during a really dark period. One of the periods when you're thinking about quitting, which happens quite a lot. So make sure you have conviction. If you're going to start this, make sure God has called you to do this so that you can look back on that when in doubt. But I sent this email to the guys in Virginia. I said, I don't know how long I can put my family through this. So I don't know how this is going to work out in the end. And the guys kind of say, like, what's up? And this all happened when there was a prayer meeting. All the pastors around Iceland were invited to come to the parliament to pray for a day. And I remember I was driving my car, which was about to break down. It was almost completely out of gas, so I was hoping to get there and back. And when I got there, I couldn't pay for the parking ticket. Like the parking... I couldn't pay the parking to park outside the parliament. And I was just driving back, and I was thinking, God, should I even been doing this? Is this just a stupid idea that I had? And so I was having these doubts, and then out from that desperation grew churches that came, and they wanted to help us do this. They wanted to financially back us so that we could do this. And so we're here now because of really generous people, some of whom we've never met before. Just faithful, loving people that are giving to their church, and their church is being generous with it. And that's hard, not being driven by that. Like, I've noticed it's a tendency of mine to be driven by guilt, to think about all the different people that are giving of their hard-earned money, probably not in easy circumstances financially, but still being faithful in giving. And now I'm getting their money, and I'm being, so I need to work, and I need to work hard for this money. And that's probably what contributed a lot to my burnout. If you're driven by that, you can do that for an X amount of time, but that's not a sustaining energy source to draw from. That's going to cause you to burn out. You need to be driven by the grace and glory of God. And so we're here. And the past 2 years have been insanely difficult. And I don't know how we would have made it through them without support from outside. In June 7th, 2016, we got a test result back from our son who had not walked for about a month and a half. And we realized that he had leukemia, ALL leukemia. And it was so weird. Like, I remember getting the news, and it was like a wave that just came over you. Like, I think I actually gasped for air when I got the news. It was so weird. You could feel it in your body. So strange. And it was hard because he was really autistic. And we thought he had hurt himself at a birthday party because that's when he stopped walking. And we were trying to figure out what's going on, but he wouldn't let any doctors or nurses touch him. So we had to put him down to get a bunch of scans done and that type of stuff to check out what's going on with his leg. Why isn't he walking? And then draw blood from him and that type of stuff. And then we get the test results back, and basically we're told, yeah, okay, we're going to start chemo tomorrow, and you're going to be here probably for the next 4 months. Expect to be here, for the first 4 months, and this treatment is going to take 2.5 years, basically. So we do that. We go through that, and that was a trying period. I was already tired by then, and that was the first time for a while that we were going to take a little summer vacation, and my summer vacation was spent at the hospital doing the chemo thing. And it was crazy the first 3 months because of his autism. He was so not wanting anyone to touch him. So every time a nurse walked in, every time a doctor walked in, and especially when they were trying to get needles into him and that type of stuff, I mean, he would scream and we'd have to hold him down. Like, we put tubes into his vein over here so that we wouldn't have to put a new needle in every time to give him his drugs. And it was just like, it was weird. It was just an opening on his skin and a tube would come out. And we put him in, like, he kept ripping them out from his skin. And he did that 3 times until we put this little, I think it's called a fountain. It was just crazy, man. And you stay at the hospital and you realize there's a lot of suffering that you don't see. Like, this is not, none of this gets the spotlight, but you see all these kids with no hair and you're just like, wow, I didn't realize this was happening to so many people. Man, you meet parents who are grieving, and you hear about parents when your son used to play, with their daughter, and now she's died, and you just wonder, like, God, what do you have in store for us here? What do you want us to do here? And so an unplanned pregnancy came along. Solomon was conceived, and we're expecting him in the midst of chemo. So he's supposed to be born in April 11th, and chemo is supposed to be happening April 15th or something like that. And we're like, this is going to be rough. It's going to be really rough, but we'll figure it out. And then we find out that his stomach is not inflated during the sonar. And so the doctors think that his esophagus is not connected to his stomach. So maybe not only will he be birthed and we'll have chemo right following, but we're expecting now to have a surgery where he connects the esophagus to his stomach. right after he's born, so he might have to be at the hospital for 2 weeks or so. But then he's born, and he comes out very limp. He doesn't say anything, and you see, just because they were prepping her for a C-section. If this last push wouldn't work, she would have gotten a C-section. And so there were like 10 different doctors and nurses in there, probably 20. I mean, there was a lot. And I was looking at my wife, and then I was looking at the doctors and nurses, and I just saw these looks on their faces. And I was going insane because I was asking them, what's going on? Can you please tell me what's going on? And everyone's like, yeah, we'll see, you know. And it's like, I was going insane because I was freaking out. Is my kid dead? Or, I mean, and then all of a sudden I hear a little bit of crying. But they realized there's something wrong. So right away they put a tube up his nose to keep his tongue from suffocating him. And he's in the intensive care unit, and we don't know what's going on. Then they do a brain scan. He's underdeveloped brain, 5 different parts, and we're like, so we're looking at a long hospital stay, and we have no idea what we're looking for. They've never seen this before. And so we stay there for about 2 months until they do all kinds of testing. They send it to Sweden and Norway and Germany and Decode, which is this lab here in Iceland. And there's a bunch of different tests going out everywhere in the world and trying to figure out what's going on. And then the test results come back from Decode saying that he has an X chromosomal genetic mutation. And there's only 2 other people in the world that have it. So we got our answer. But at the same time, we really don't have an answer as to what to expect. Because a data pool of 2 people is not really a bunch of data. We can give you a real good picture of what his future will look like. And so he's there. Mikael's at the hospital getting chemo. We're trying to give Sigros a regular life, trying to get time to play with her. It's just been brutal. It has been brutal. But in our weakness, God has sustained the ministry here, and we've been growing slowly and surely, and people in our church have been stepping up to serve the church and lead the church, and it's been awesome to see. And you start kind of wondering through all this suffering, you know, God, what do you have in store? All things work together for the good of those who are called by his name and loved by him. So God, how does this work for the good? And you may not have answers. And then at some point, you may stop asking why and start dwelling on who God is. Can I trust him? You know? And you start to adore God, and you love God, and you see him in all of his glory. And you know that every tear that you shed, it won't be without purpose. He is in control, sovereign, the Lord of all, and your Father. He's adopted you into his family and made you his own. And so, it's been quite a journey. I just turned 29, and I feel like I've experienced quite a lot for a 29-year-old. Because I used to be the guy who was, you know, like everyone. You know, you watch movies where you hear about, you know, where the main character's family member is murdered, and you kind of like, oh man, can you imagine being a person who loses a family member to murder? And then you get to go through that. And I've seen people in wheelchairs with, you know, with their kids in wheelchairs with no hair. And I wondered, I can't imagine what it's like to hear that your kid has cancer. And then you go through it. And then you see people, you know, who have handicapped children who can't function well or, you know, control their bodies. And you wonder, man, what is it like? But I realized with that, I had never thought of what it's like to hear the news. Like when he is born or she is born, what it's like to hear your kid may never talk again, may never walk, may never swallow, may never even acknowledge that you're there. You know, it's just like, I never thought about that. And it is really difficult. And I honestly don't know how people do it in that hospital that are in similar circumstances and don't have anything beyond these circumstances to look at. So I want to be a light there. And my wife has done an incredible job of being light to some of the women there. And I'm so thankful for our brothers and sisters who are praying for us and praying for Solomon and Michael. And I pray that this would be used for God's glory. And I know it will in one way or another. So that's our testimony. I feel like I've been talking again really, really long. This is not supposed to be this long. I should have just done the testimony. God bless you guys. Let's end this with an intense, royalty-free music called Out for Blood. This must be good. Oh, wow. Did totally not expect that. Out for Blood. And it's a really chill song.